Green Book is a 2018 comedy drama biography film based on a true story set in the 1960s about the real-life friendship between two unlikely individuals. One of those individuals is famous African-American pianist Dr. Don Shirley. This guy was such a genius at playing the piano that he actually got invited to the White House and would regularly perform there. And he decides to embark on a tour of the Deep South as a way to further the civil rights movement and get people in the Deep South seeing a very successful, very accomplished African-American man in front of them and change the discussion on race relations. Now, in order to do this, he needs to hire someone to drive him to his various gigs as well as provide him protection. And that is where we are introduced to Tony the Lip, or Tony Vallelonga. Now, this Tony the Lip is the stereotypical Italian tough guy. He speaks with an Italian accent. He works as a bouncer at a club. He seems to have some sort of ties with the mafia in that he does jobs for them sometimes, maybe. But when he gets this role to drive around Dr. Don Shirley, he does take it. Now, in the beginning of this film, we see some scenes with this Tony the Lip where he's portrayed as being a little bit racist, but as the movie progresses and he becomes more friends with this Dr. Don Shirley, he overcomes that racism and really starts to defend Dr. Don Shirley with some of the occurrences they have on their road trip in the Deep South. This movie was directed by Peter Farrelly, who directed movies such as Something About Mary, Kingpin, Dumb and Dumber 2. That was a horrible movie. But this movie is very unlike all of his other films, because this movie is leans towards being a drama than a slapstick, stupid comedy like some of his other films. So it's very interesting to see him attached to this film. Now, this movie was written by Nick Vallelonga, who is the son of Tony, the real-life Tony in the movie. So that is why maybe the movie seems to be written from the perspective of Tony the Lip's character rather than Dr. Don Shirley. The cast in this film is fantastic. Viggo Mortensen is our lead as Tony Lip, which, by the way, before I get into him, I highly recommend everybody watch his film from 2016, Captain Fantastic. That was a great movie. So Viggo is Tony the Lip in this film, and he apparently gained lots of weight to look like the character, and he plays the role with a very Italian stereotype, but it totally works for the role. And he is very funny in the film, but he also has some heartwarming moments, so he really did a great job in this. Mahershala Ali is a fantastic actor. He was in 2016's Moonlight, where he won an Oscar for supporting actor for that film. And in this one, he plays this Dr. Don Shirley. He plays the role of this very serious upper-class professional, and we see some great interaction between him and Viggo, who were kind of polar opposites in their personalities, and some great moments there. We also get some great emotional scenes with him dealing with being a black man in 1960s America. Another actress we have in this film is Linda Cardellini, who some of you might know from 1999's Freaks and Geeks, one of my favorite shows, and she plays the wife of Viggo Mortensen's character in this film, and she was fantastic as well as the supportive wife. Now, the name of this film, Green Book, is in reference to this little traveler's guide that African Americans could use when they were traveling the Deep South. And in this Green Book, it would say a list of hotels and motels that were friendly to African Americans, where they wouldn't be hassled if they stayed there. So in the movie, sometimes Dr. Don Shirley has to stay at one hotel, and Viggo Mortensen and some of the other members of the band can stay at another nicer hotel just down the road. So that's just one example of all the many ways this movie tackles race relations in the 1960s. We also see Dr. Don Shirley getting hassled with using a specific bathroom sometimes, or he's performing at this one restaurant, and before he's about to perform, they were going to feed everybody, and he's not allowed in the dining area where everybody else is, and he's like, this is kind of ridiculous. I'm not allowed to eat here, but you want me to perform here? And we also see some interactions with police officers that are very racially based. He also wants to buy a suit at one point, and the guy in the suit store is kind of like, whoa, 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 I'm not gonna let you try that on. So yeah, lots of interesting examples seen through this film. So we have a lot of really funny moments in this film as well, most of them coming from Tony Lip and his abrasive personality, and some funny moments where he's rough around the edges. So we see that they have ordered Kentucky Fried Chicken in Kentucky, and he's eating the chicken while he's driving the car, and he wants to give some chicken to Dr. Don Shirley, who has apparently never had fried chicken, and Don Shirley is insisting he doesn't want to eat it, but Viggo Mortensen's character eventually convinces him to do that. So that was pretty funny. We also have a scene where Viggo is trying to write letters to his wife, and Dr. Don Shirley helps him write these letters because the earlier versions were very basic and very kind of childish and lots of misspellings. There's also a lot of fun scenes where Tony Lip has to go in and solve a problem. For example, at one performance, they don't have the piano that Dr. Don Shirley usually uses, so Viggo has to kind of smack the guy around and get him to get the right piano down there. And there is another scene where Don Shirley is in this bar and he's being beaten up by these rednecks, and Viggo Mortensen has to go in there and be the tough guy and sort of intimidate these guys into letting this Don Shirley go, and it is a very tricky situation to work his way out of. Now, of course, as this movie progresses, we see this friendship and this relationship between these two characters develop, and how they become closer and how they see things from each other's point of view, and how this friendship develops over time. Really great stuff, really great movie. This movie is just such a crowd pleaser. Now, this movie opened at TIFF, the Toronto International Film Festival, where it won the People's Choice Award, and it was up against other films such as A Star is Born and First Man, two very well acclaimed movies this year, but Green Book beat out both of those films, and it just goes to show how well this movie is received and how many people do like it. The reviews for this movie are pretty good, and it has an 82% on Rotten Tomatoes. I was just curious what some of the negative reviews were saying about this film. Some people felt that they glossed over Don Shirley being gay. I felt that they covered it as much as they needed to. Some people also felt that this film glossed over race relations and simplified it too much. One critic from NPR says that this is a well-meaning but glib and shallow ode to interracial healing. Another critic was talking about how this movie focuses too much on Tony Lip and not enough on Don Shirley. Some also felt that it was a little bit predictable, and that you know that these two opposites are going to come together and become friends and overcome any differences. Although to that I say that this is not a mystery film. It is a pretty straightforward film, but that does not make it a bad film. This movie is fantastic. While maybe there are some negatives, none of that stuff bothered me. To me, this is a perfect movie. I would not change anything. I really enjoyed it. It was such a fun time, and it was such a great film. The performances were great. I really love this film. I would give it a 10 out of 10, and I don't usually give perfect scores. Very rarely, maybe 1, 2, or 3 movies a year, but I think this movie deserves it, so I give this a perfect score. Go see it.